It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Sam Lagana, the voice of the Los Angeles Rams and Sofi Stadium. How are you doing today?
Hey, Brandon, it's great to be with you. It's a beautiful day here at the Lagana House, and we're talking to you from our patio, and it's another spectacular day on the California coast while you guys are out there in North Carolina.
That's wonderful. Can you talk about how you got, of course, into athletics and being the voice of a program?
That's a great question. Thanks a lot, Brandon, for asking that. You know, it's kind of a funny thing. I played basketball when I was a kid and actually played tennis, basketball, football, volleyball quite a bit when I was younger. And when I was playing basketball in high school, I got low bridged, which is when somebody takes the legs out underneath you when you're going up for a rebound. I'm 6'5", and was going up for a rebound and wound up on the floor, and I hurt my back. And they checked the x-rays and so forth. They found out that I have an extra lumbar. And so it happened again. And the coach in the school said, you can't play anymore. You're just a liability to yourself. And so the coach said, look, you're still going to practice and you're still on the team and you're still going to do these things. And by the way, you're also going to go over there and announce since you seem to know what's going on. And so that's kind of how it all got going, if you will, in one way or another, was sort of doing that. A little before that, I was doing, in our town, I worked at the movie theater and I was the assistant manager. And one of my jobs was to record you've reached the Bay Twin Cinemas, located at 15140 Sunset Boulevard in Pacific Palisades. And so I know that our basketball coach who lived in our town, knew I did that. So maybe that's why I got to do it. Although I probably wasn't that great at it. I just did it because somebody had to do it on Thursday night and I work Thursdays. So that's how it kind of all worked out.
Can you talk about, of course, how you became the voice of the Rams? Like, what was the process like?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting process. So the Rams, as I grew up, were here in Los Angeles, and they moved to Anaheim when I was in my late teen years, if you will. And then they moved to St. Louis. And so I was a Rams fan. I went to Rams games with my dad at the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum. And that was a fantastic experience, to be a young man and have the opportunity to go to games with your dad. When the Rams announced that they were coming back, I went and bought season tickets like any good Ram fan from their youth. And slowly thereafter, I got an email saying, hey, if you might be interested in announcing the Rams, would you submit these 6 lines? And the email came in and I submitted these 6 lines, Brandon, and I added another line on my own. And lo and behold, I didn't hear anything for 2 months. And so I was actually thinking I was getting punked in some ways at first, because when I first got this email, I wrote back to the guys and I said, hey, listen, I can't get to a studio until next week. And, I'll send it in then. They were like, just record it on your iPhone. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely getting punked here. So I thought it was my buddy Diego setting me up, who they've set me up before. And it was real. And 2 months later, I'm having dinner with Diego at a restaurant in Los Angeles, and he says, "Hey, what's going on with that Rams thing?" And I'm thinking, yeah, you set this up. And lo and behold, I get into the parking lot that night after answering that question. I get an email, "Hey, we'd like you to be the voice of the Los Angeles Rams." And so that's kind of how it went down. I then requested that I come over and meet with the guys because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't Diego. And here I am, 5 years later, continuing to announce the NFL in Los Angeles. Fortunately, I had an experience. I announced arena football in Los Angeles. And at the time, one of the guys I worked with was Kevin Demoff, who's now the president of the Los Angeles Rams. So that may have helped a little bit.
Can you talk about what were the 6 lines that you added to what they said?
Well, the 6 lines were pretty sterile lines. It was like, Goff to Gurley, touchdown LA, things like that. And doing it as you would do it in a game, Goff to Gurley, touchdown LA, that kind of stuff. And I added, it's time for every man, woman, and child to get out of your seat, get on your feet, and rise with the Rams, and kind of make it something fun and how I would communicate and connect with our fan base. That was really my goal, was how do we connect with the fan base, bring them into the game, make them a part of the experience. Those were my hopes and joys, Brandon.
Can you talk about how you came up with the rise with the Rams?
Yeah, that's another great question. You've got a lot of good questions here, Brandon. Thank you. I've always believed that the fan is an integral part of the experience of sport. And so dating back to, I announced volleyball, beach volleyball for many years. I announced college volleyball, basketball, and I always felt like if there was some way to get the fans up on their feet, get them into the game so they were more of a part of it. My style of announcing, I try to bring them into the game. I try to come at it from an experience of we're all on the same home team. So you got to keep in mind that most of the time you're announcing a home game, you're really talking to mostly home fans, right? The greater percentage of people in the facility that you're announcing in, the venue you're announcing in, are going to be home fans. And so you want to make them feel like they are really part of that game and that experience. So I've always taken that approach, having been a former participant in sport. I always kind of bring that, hey, this is what it would be like if you were on the court feeling of, yes, right now we just made that basket, those kinds of things, or, touchdown, boom. Those things all kind of came out in those ways, even back in high school football and in those days, just turning in. And here's what's going on. It's 3rd down. We cannot let them cross, the 17-yard line for that 4th down. So you've got to get into this, those kinds of things. And that's sort of the way I came up with my style. So the coming up with the rise of the Rams evolved over my lifetime. So it was, different kinds of programming, I should say, like, hey, it's time to stand with the Matadors when I was announcing for Cal State Northridge, or just getting people up on their feet at the beginning of a contest and at different times where, it might be fun on the beach, getting people up to do the wave, making them all a part of the experience. So Rise with the Rams, it's sort of, it had some alliteration to it. So I thought that would be a good sound.
Can you talk about preparation and announcing in SoFi Stadium?
Yeah, in preparation for a game, and you're a fan, and probably a lot of the people who watch your sports talk program are fans. So you're trailing and tracking the teams that you're most interested in. I do the same. And so you have a good idea and indication of what's going on. And obviously you also make your own thought process about, how is the team doing? What's happening? How's it going? So those things come into play quite a bit as you're preparing. And then obviously looking at all of the kind of inside information that I would get from our media department, as well as listening to my friend JB Long and listening to DeMarco and listening to some of the morning show folks as to hearing what their thoughts about our team are. Always putting it together, listening to the fans. Now that there's social media like Twitter and so forth, I actually enjoy even reading, how are the fans feeling? And sometimes they're positive and sometimes they're not so positive. But for the most part, everybody is generally in an upbeat mode. So preparing is getting there. And then it's coming down to game day, breaking down the roster. Who's going to be on that roster that night? Who are the opponents? I'm generally taking a look at the opponents that we are going to face at home the week before, looking at some video. Who's going to be relevant? Who's going to be significant in the game? Whose names do I need to really focus on? There are some really tough names. Ndamukong Suh. The Sioux is not so tough, but the Ndamukong, and in our own team, I should say, Samson Ebukam. At first you're looking at that. You want to get these names as right as you can, and really kind of respect the folks who are participating. And so that's important. And so going over that, the pronunciation guides for both the home and away teams, getting a board built. I have a board, and I actually do my board numerically. A lot of people will lay their boards out by position. I lay my board out numerically because I'm calling in the stadium. So I just need to quickly identify who is in the play. And then my spotter, Garrett Nakagawa, helps me. He calls the defense usually to identify who's making the tackle, because in a non-open field tackle, so if there's a scrum of a tackle, it's sometimes hard to identify who is on the bottom. And our delays on our monitors are sometimes a few seconds, and you really don't have a few seconds. These play clocks are moving the whole time, and you have to be out by 20 seconds on the play clock. So it's important that you're getting the call in quickly and accurately as possible, looking at down and distance and all of the other information that needs to go in. So that's sort of how I prepare, get the boards driven up. And then on game day, you're taking a look at who's on the inactive roster for the day and which games who you have to scratch. And then even this past weekend and this COVID, all of a sudden somebody pops up on the roster that wasn't on the roster Wednesday, wasn't on the roster Friday, wasn't on the roster yesterday when you printed it out at 10 o'clock at night, and poof, there they are. And so we had a little bit of that even this past weekend with Seattle, that it wasn't clear to us that someone was on the roster that actually had some significance in the game for the Seahawks. But those things happen, and you roll with it. And you just do the best you can to make sure that you're as aware as possible. That's really one of the keys, being as aware as possible, Brandon.
That's amazing. Can you talk about your time announcing for the Pro Beach Volleyball in Venice?
Yeah, Pro Beach Volleyball as a sport really got fired up, I would say, in about 1984. Beach volleyball, as it was played mainly here in California and Hawaii, and a little bit in Florida, some on the Texas coastline, and a little bit up on the East Coast, but really didn't have much penetration. But after the '84 Olympic Games, where the United States beat the Soviets, that was a big deal. And so moving forward, beach volleyball got some attention. And so I was fortunate to be a part of that group that was involved with the infancy of the AVP, the Association of Volleyball Professionals. And I actually went to work on the AVP tour, coordinating marketing, promotions, and public relations. And so I had that kind of feeler. And when I got out on the field, or on the sand, I should say, they asked me if I would announce. And I had known some folks involved with the tour from volleyball, because I'd announced volleyball, because I'd played volleyball. And as I mentioned, I had gotten hurt. So I wound up announcing on the tour and coordinating marketing, promotions, and public relations, and working with our corporate partners. And as this sport grew in an incredible way, where we went from just a few events a year to 30 events a year all across the country, it was really kind of fun to kind of build the sport up and really involve people and take a sport to America and introduce it to America. And we had that opportunity with great thanks to our corporate partners like Jose Cuervo and Miller Brewing Company, NBC Sports, Prime Ticket. All of those kind of corporate partners helped us along the way, along with some of the brand sponsors. But yeah, it was tough, because you had to educate folks as to what was going on. In some parts of America, men's volleyball was not relevant. and trying to educate them on what was relevant in the game and how it was fun became part of our experience, part of the lifestyle. And it really is a lifestyle sport. And so it kind of grew, and getting out there, and my feeling was I needed to connect with the fans, bring forward how the corporate partners were helping us. We didn't charge really for attendance at that time. The corporate partners offset all of those costs, so fans could come to the beaches for free. So sort of making that relevant to them, that these folks were offsetting all of the expenses and paying the prize money for the athletes. And of course, I knew a number of the athletes well, but I was always focused on the fan experience and the benefit from what the fan was going to get out of being in there. And for me, it worked out pretty well. I spent a little over 20 years doing beach volleyball, and once in a while, I still am invited back down to the sand to commentate on volleyball, which I enjoy. It's nice to see the evolution of the game, its popularity, and its move all the way into the Olympics. That's just been an amazing thing to see that happen.
Can you talk about the difference between announcing in pro football and pro beach volleyball?
I probably have the opportunity to be more animated a little bit and a little bit more discussionary. There's no time limits in beach volleyball. You're pretty much you're talking right up until the serve, and you're not really, there were no rules. You need to understand that there were no rules when I started announcing volleyball. So there were no, okay, don't talk here or talk here, but you're describing play leading up to play. You're recapping play in volleyball. In football, you're really kind of recapping play and citing down distance, sizable benchmarks. On both of them, there's similarities in that you've got corporate partners that you're tying into the public address announcements, and you're giving some excellence to that, and you're engaging the fans. So there's a lot of overlay, but it probably comes down to the big difference between what you're saying and how often you're saying and how much you can say. In the NFL, as I mentioned earlier, you have to be out with 20 seconds left on the play clock, or if the center touches the ball, you've got to be out. So you got to be really paying attention to what's going on the field, what's happening on the play clock, and you got to get out. The NFL doesn't like it if you roll over. Sometimes there's technical glitches. You don't like those at all because you want to be accurate. Those are kind of the way things work out. I would say the big difference really is somebody like in baseball, somebody that announces baseball, you announce what's coming. In baseball, you rarely ever announce what happened. So now batting, number 3, Brandon, and then you just leave it there. In football, you're recapping the play, or you're assigning who just came in if you've got the time to do that, or at the beginning, who's at quarterback, what your players are, those kinds of things.
Can you talk about, of course, meeting Denny Lennon through pro beach volleyball?
Yeah, Denny Lennon and I really have kind of come up around the same time. We're contemporaries, and Denny came up in the Venice area, and I grew up, maybe 5-6 miles north of Denny. Very similar communities. At the time that we were growing up, both defense worker communities. Our parents, many of the parents in the areas worked in defense, or if you will, aircraft. So Northrop, Hughes, those kinds of places, Douglas, they were all relevant in Santa Monica, Venice, and our community of Pacific Palisades. You also had school teachers. So the communities were very, very similar. And so you just had a kind of a neat experience. Now, interestingly, as a young kid, I watched a lot of sports, including roller derby and wrestling and boxing. And my grandmother, interestingly, would watch roller derby with me. The LA Thunderbirds were our team. Loved roller derby, would have loved to have announced roller derby, but I loved roller derby and went to the Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles and the Forum to watch roller derby with my grandmother. And Big John Hall, Ralphie Valadares were our stars on those teams in roller derby. But the guy who would always announce the big boxing matches, and the guy who would come and do the big, we play the New York Bombers in roller derby. The guy who was doing that big mic drop, that was Jimmy Lennon. That was Denny's uncle, Jimmy, and he was probably the quintessential boxing announcer. He's the guy that dressed up in the bow tie. He was before Michael Buffer, but probably I would say Michael Buffer's style really comes off of a Jimmy Lennon delivery. And so I knew Denny also because his family's relatives had gone to St. Monica's and St. Bernard's, which were a couple of the Catholic schools here on the west side. I went to Loyola Marymount University, which is down near where Denny grew up and where he went to high school. And so I knew a bunch of his cousins who had a band called Venice and a band called the Pine Mountain Logs. They didn't have them. They still have it. Still a great band. And so the Lennons, and then his aunts were the Lennon sisters, who were a great performance troupe. So their whole family was fairly relevant here on the west side. And so I knew Denny, and he was coming up. And then as the women broke off and started their own Pro Beach Volleyball tour, Denny assimilated into that group. So I had a lot of respect for Denny because he was doing the women's Pro Beach Volleyball tour. We were doing the men, and we would cross over on special events. And then Denny went into producing some special events. He invited me to announce in one of his special events that he was doing and he was producing. And so we've known each other quite a long time, and he kept going on different tours and doing some good things as a production guy. He's had a great success, and now he's got some great podcast shows going that are really cool. And now he gets to interview some of his lifelong childhood heroes. So it's really neat.
That's amazing. Can you talk about being awarded in 2000 the Rob Leeson Award?
Yeah, the Robert Lindsay Award came from the United States Volleyball Association. And beyond my work announcing beach volleyball, I worked with the USA volleyball teams in promoting tours and setting up tours and announcing the USA men's and women's volleyball teams across America. So we had stops in all over the place that we would set up and organize, and I got to do that. And then we started a club volleyball program back in the 90s, early 90s. I started a club volleyball program that went on to win 7 national championships. So that was a lot of fun. The LA Athletic Club program had some significance. Bill Ferguson was our program director. Gary Sato was our technical director. So we had just some great people working with us. Chris McGee, who now broadcasts Lakers, he was one of our coaches. It was great. We had some former football players that were involved. We had just a great experience with volleyball, and I was really honored by the United States Volleyball Association when they awarded me that nice honor of receiving the Robert Lindsay Award for service to the volleyball world. That was really cool.
That's amazing. Can you talk about some of the people that you looked up to whenever you got started being a sports announcer?
Yeah, anybody that was over 6'5", Brandon, is people I looked up to. No, I'm just kidding. I had a lot of people. I was blessed. The little town I grew up in, that I still reside in, if you will, Mr. Scully went to our church. And so Vince Scully was relevant. His son, Mike, was a contemporary of mine and a good friend of mine, actually. And I had the opportunity to see Mr. Scully, but we really never talked about announcing. Once in a while, as I got into my career more, he would ask me about it. One time I had lunch with him when I was in college. I asked him if we could have lunch and talk about that because I just wanted to get better. And I wanted to know what things you could do to get better. And it turned into a really cool conversation about life and people and the importance of people. And almost less about the semantics. And so that was really meaningful to me, just to understand how important kindness and how important knowing people really is. And so, Brandon, that's what I thought was a really great takeaway from Vince Scully. And then I've had the opportunity to, a guy named Joe Butita, who used to announce the Angels here in Los Angeles, and I worked together on some basketball games and some football games. And Joe was was great. He got me involved in the Southern California Sports Broadcasters Association. So then I got to start to meet some of the great sportscasters. Interestingly, my big heart, I really love working in the stadium and doing the stadium announcing. And so I'll do some play-by-play and some color and some hosting of other shows. But I really love the experience of the live experience where you're really on fire. And I also like the hosting side of doing shows. So those are the things to me that are great. The play-by-play has been fun when I've been invited to do it, and it's nice to do, and I like it. But I really love announcing in the stadium and the arena, and I like hosting these special shows. But
What
those are the
advice-
guys like Mr. Scully, you know.
What advice
Go
would
ahead,
you
I'm
give?
sorry.
You're fine. What advice would you give future sports announcers just like me that is trying to make it into the industry?
Well, I think you're doing the right thing. I was going to wrap up by saying in the last statement, I continue to talk to sports announcers today. So I even get good information, and I don't care if they're doing play-by-play or color or hosting or in stadium. I love just talking to them and learning things. And so that would be my advice, is just, figure out what your passion is, what part of announcing is your passion, and talk to those guys. We got together, Eric Smith, who broadcasts in the stadium for USC Trojan football. He and I worked together, and we got together all of the public address announcers in Los Angeles that did the Lakers, the Dodgers, the Angels, USC, UCLA, myself, the Rams, all of those folks. We all got together at one time, and USC basketball, and it was great. And just to sit down and talk about all the differences and the things we run into. Oftentimes we all work with the same staff. So the control room people are often the same. So the control room people become our connectivity. And that's kind of a fun way to go. Like Jack, who runs all of the audio at SoFi Stadium and the Coliseum and the Rose Bowl, he's in touch with each of the stadium announcers in those venues. And it's nice to, we almost can translate messages back through Jack. But then Jack wants to know, okay, well, Eric told me this about this game, or what would you think about the game we're going to see? So it's kind of fun. You get to hear what the other folks are thinking about their teams and how they relate that information to Jack. And then you get to, relate it to Jack a little bit too. So it's nice. I would say, as young guys, just reach out to people. It doesn't matter whether they're doing the high school game, the college game, the pro game. It's all the same game. And it's making sure that you're just doing the best job that you can possibly do. And I'm very grateful to the Rams for having me. I'm grateful to the fans. They make the experience wonderful. Even now, I'm grateful to the 3,500 cutouts that are in SoFi Stadium. They're a little stiff, but they make the experience better for me as well.
What advice would you give, of course, people that are looking to be a voiceover for a college or even professional team?
Brandon, I would say, just start connecting, do whatever you can do, even if it's getting to the park and doing the Little League in your park. That's another great place you can go. Just start getting the experience. It takes time to get comfortable to deliver something fast, and knowing that you've got time constraints. Those things are important. To have a good, strong delivery that's live. You don't get 3 takes, right? Like if you're broadcasting, let's say on television, or if you're doing TV, oftentimes your stand-up you could do a couple times. For what we do, we often get that one shot to get it right. And we don't like to make mistakes. I don't like to make mistakes. I keep a little tally when I know that I made a mistake, and I don't like it. I'm always trying to keep that number really low. But it happens every once in a while. You might say 3rd down and it was, 4th down because you looked down at the marker and the guy hadn't flipped the marker. You looked up at the board and hadn't flipped the board. That's embarrassing. I don't like it, but I'm going to tell you, I make that mistake, and not often, thankfully, but it does happen. And so just continuing to get practice on it. And sometimes even doing it at home can work. I'll tell you what I did one time, Brandon, is practice. I was offered the opportunity to try out for the Dodgers stadium announcer position. This is quite some time ago. And there's a huge delay in Dodger Stadium. I had, as a young man in high school, I had the opportunity to announce there. And I remember it was really screwy. You would say, hello, hello, and then it would come. So while you're talking, you're hearing the speaker system, which is out beyond center field. So when I knew that I had that opportunity, what I did is I rented a sound system, and I went out to an empty field near LAX, and I set the speakers, and I got long monster cables and power, and I set the speakers up way out there, you know, over 150 yards away. And I put myself at the other end, and I made the announcements, and I just rehearsed it as if I was going to do it. So when I got into the stadium, it wasn't going to be shocking to me that I was talking over my own voice for quite some time. The LA Memorial Coliseum is very much the same way. It's a single source system. It's a 2 to 2 second delay, and then it bounces in there. So it comes off the sound system here and then hits the peristyle. So you hear it, you say it, you hear it again when it comes off the peristyle. It's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of ambient noise that you're walking through. SoFi Stadium is unbelievable. It's the most incredible stadium in the world, and the sound is pure and crisp. So as you say it, it comes. I had to get a whole new microphone to record PA announcements that was more crisp, because the sound system wasn't picking up, or I should say the sound system was picking up some of the impurities of the older mic. I had to get a new mic that had a higher calibration to really kind of help the sound system, because the sound system was so pure.
That's wonderful information. Where can my listeners find you at on social media? Where can my listeners find you at on social media?
Oh, thanks for asking. I can be found. So my day job is I work at Pepperdine University as an associate vice chancellor. So I can be found on social media in two ways: on Twitter at Pepperdine Sam or just at Pepperdine Sam. There's no dots, at Pepperdine Sam. And then for the Rams stuff, you can find me at Sam with the Rams. Those are both on my Twitter feeds. Those are probably the most relevant feeds I use to communicate with the fan base.
Thank you again, Sam Lagana, for your interview, and best of luck in the future with the Los Angeles Rams. You can find Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon. Hey, Brandon, I have some questions for you real quick, though.
Yes.
I got some questions for you. Brandon, I want to know, why do you want to go into sports announcing? Like, you clearly have a passion for this, so tell me the why.
So I want to go into sports announcing because I go to a local community college, and I also work for a local community college as a sports reporter. And one of the people that's the voice of the program, he inspired me to go into it. And I want to one day become, of course, the voice of a college program.
That's great. Now, what is your favorite sport and why?
My favorite sport is football, and it's because I've always grown up watching football and stuff, and of course, attending high school and college games.
When you're watching a football game, what's your favorite package to look at? 11-man package, a 12? What do you like when you're seeing the offense set up? What fascinates you the most?
More like a 12-man package.
And why is that?
Because it's very interesting whenever it's in I formation. And of course, my favorite position is the running back position. And then my second favorite position is the quarterback position.
Nice. I like that. So at the Rams, we run 3 running backs. we have a very fluid system at the running back position. So you ought to check that out. You'd like that because we rotate those running backs quite a bit. So take a look at that. You might enjoy that in a Ram game. And tell me this, on the defensive side of the ball, how do you like to see the defense set up?
Normally in cover zone, and of course sometimes in the blitz zone.
And why is that? So they can get after the other running back?
Yes, so they can, of course, get after the running back and the quarterback more easier.
That's great. And now, what would you aspire, Brandon, like in your future? What would you like to aspire to as a broadcaster? Where would you like to broadcast besides at your local college?
Of course, I would love to get on with like ESPN and, of course, get my own production team, kind of just like Denny Lennon, or even do kind of how Denny Lennon has his own production team.
Well, maybe you could be a field reporter on the East Coast for Denny Lennon. How would that be?
That would be wonderful.
That's what you ought to propose that to Denny, that you can get some good clips on guys that they can't get clips on out here for his show. And then you could have a quick segment drop in live from the East Coast with Brandon. That might be a fun way for you to go.
Yeah, that would be a wonderful idea.
Well, maybe he'll do it. So best wishes to you. Thanks for having me on your show today, Brandon. It was really my pleasure, and I wish you the best of luck with your career.
Thank you again, Sam Lagana. And you can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon. And you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Sam Lagana, for your interview, and best of luck in your future.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.